BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
From BBC Radio 4, this is Things Fell Apart, Season 2.
When Stephenie Meyer was first writing Twilight, she Googled the rainiest place in the U.S., and she found Forks. A tiny little dot on the map town in the middle of the forests of Washington state that almost nothing happens in for most of the year.
Forks, Washington, home of Edward and Bella, the vampires from Twilight, is, in real life, as this fan video says, a place where nothing much happens. Except on June the 3rd, 2020, when something did happen.
My name is Matthew Randazzo V. I am a senior governmental executive for Native American tribal nations.
The thing that happened to a family who lived 500 miles from Forks in Spokane. They became collateral damage in a culture war inflamed by a national media that had become too polarised and ideological. The family remains too traumatised to give interviews, they told us, but one of them did tell the story to Matthew because of his advocacy work.
I spoke to one member of the family that was impacted. I had lived in Clallam County, I had worked in Forks, so I knew the area. You're dealing with an extremely isolated, insular environment, basically in the middle of a remote rainforest where a couple thousand people are all stuck together.
And now Matthew is telling the story to me.
It's a lower class family, a mixed race family, a middle-aged white mother by the name of Shannon Lowe and her younger spouse, a black and Native American gentleman by the name of Tyrone Cheval, and Tyrone's mother, Sandra Rickard, who is Native American, and Shannon's white daughter from a previous marriage.
They'd been working for a Native American casino, but then came lockdown and the casino closed its doors.
And they basically took the opportunity to say, well, we don't have jobs. And they decided to try to make the best use of the freedom that they had while everyone was kind of in isolation. And they had one resource that allowed them to do that, a converted 36-foot-long school bus that they had painted white and nicknamed Big Bertha. And their game plan was to go on a road trip. And one of the places they decided to go was Forks, Washington, because Sandra, the grandmother, was a fan of Twilight and had never been there.
In fact, Sandra had been spending lockdown rereading the Twilight books. Washington State's stay-at-home order was lifted on May the 22nd, and so soon afterwards they set off in their school bus, passing through the nearby town of Sequim.
It's a beautiful, sunny summer day. As they're driving from Sequim, people start honking at them, and they're used to people honking at them because they're driving in a big white converted school bus.
Did they think that they were honking at them in a sort of friendly way, like nice school bus?
Yeah, initially that is what they thought. I mean, Washington State is a state that has a fair share of quote-unquote hippies. So driving around in an old school bus, it's not unexpected that people are greeting you. Unfortunately, as they go further down this very isolated, lonely highway, they start to notice some folks are flipping them off on the road, giving them really hard stares. Some folks in pickup trucks are kind of following them for a while. And they begin to get a little bit nervous, but they're not reading into it too much. So they pull into Forks. It's a small town.
Their first stop was the grocery store, because they had been living off canned food and had decided to treat themselves to shrimp.
And they pull into the Thriftway grocery store parking lot.
I know what happened next because it was captured on CCTV. A pickup truck pulled up right next to them, and then another, and another, and an ATV, a kind of quad bike, and then more pickup trucks circling their school bus. The drivers climbed out of their vehicles and stood in a huddle. Many of them were armed. And then they turned and stared at the family in the bus.
Shannon, the middle-aged mother who's dressed in capri pants, threads her way off the bus and heads in the store to go get some food. And of course, she's passing through people, and they're guys in bulletproof vests. They're people who have pistols very prominently holstered. It's a noticeably ominous group of people.
Some of the men were taking photographs of the bus and the family. And then
A large man with a bulletproof vest on began to try to force the door to their bus and come in. Tyrone, a young black gentleman with his Native American mother, is now interrogated by these strangers. They immediately asked him, "Why are you here? What are you doing in town? What are your intentions?"
So I presume they just said, "Oh, we're here because we're Twilight fans and we've been in lockdown and we got cabin fever and we just wanted to go camping."
The fundamental version of what I heard was simply they just kept repeating, "We're going camping. We're just going camping." Shannon comes back from the store, gets in the vehicle, and right away as they drive away, they're followed.
You can see it on the CCTV. They weren't just followed. They were followed by a fleet of vehicles. People were standing at intersections with rifles, flipping them the finger as they drove by. Even so, they stuck to their plan and headed to the campsite.
I have to admit, I am surprised by the optimism and lack of suspicion that the family displayed that day.
And so, with their shrimp ready to be grilled, they set up camp.
A very undeveloped campground, no one else is there. And to get to the campground, they had to go over a small bridge over a small creek. A group of ATVs, some of which had been following them and some of which they had not seen prior, sped by the campground and sprayed gravel in their direction. After that, they start hearing gunshots. Not directly at them, not right next to them, but in the general vicinity of them, they just hear gunshots being shot in the air.
Jeez. Were they still setting up their tent at this point?
Yeah, they're still setting up, but they're starting to get nervous at this point. At this time, they start hearing in the distance chainsaws.
The chainsaws decided it. It would, they realised, be prudent to leave Forks. And so they packed up and headed back towards the bridge.
And when they come up to the bridge, they find that the chainsaws that had been heard in the distance had actually been someone cutting down 5 alder trees.
To block their path?
As a barricade, yes. There's some reason they are being kept there in this isolated campground by themselves in the middle of a forest while locals zoom by in ATVs and someone shooting gunshots in the background. Shannon tries to reach the police on the telephone and has no reception and can't get through. It's so scary that Shannon's daughter begins a journal which starts, "If I'm dead and you just found this, ... Finally, they get through to the sheriff's department and a deputy is dispatched. The police arrive, they help them get out of the campground.
So why did a family of innocent Twilight fans get treated in this terrible way by the people of Forks? There is, actually, a specific reason. So what the family didn't realise was that all of this was happening because word had got around town that they thought that this family was Antifa.
Right.
Antifa, the loose collective of anti-fascists. George Floyd had been murdered a week earlier, and Antifa was out in force, protesting in Minneapolis and Portland and New York City. But why had the people of Forks become so convinced that this family was Antifa and out to destroy their tiny, remote town? What had happened to make them believe that? The rest of this episode is dedicated to trying to answer that question.
There is some breaking news tonight in the worlds of media and politics.
And arguably, it began right here, 4 years earlier, on July the 21st, 2016.
Now official, Roger Ailes, a giant figure behind the scenes in television and the GOP, has been ousted from his job as the head of Fox News Channel in the wake of a sexual harassment lawsuit by a former Fox News anchor.
My theory of the case about Fox was always that the departure of Roger Ailes left a massive leadership vacuum at Fox News.
This is the conservative commentator and Fox insider, Jonah Goldberg. He appeared regularly on Fox for 12 years until 2021.
I live in no fear of contradiction when I say that Roger Ailes was a deeply flawed human being. But he was also a bit of a genius. He understood that the news division really, really mattered. The opinion side made more money, had better ratings, but the news side is what gave the place its mission.
By news side, do you mean evidence-based journalism, like non-ideological, non-polemical journalism?
Yes, I do.
Our job is to be objective.
This is Roger Ailes saying the same thing in 1996.
We'd like to be premier journalists. We'd like to restore objectivity where we find it lacking.
Of course, it's kind of subjective to argue that his news division was objective, but Ailes's various obituary writers do concede that under his leadership, Fox News did its fair share of straightforward reporting.
The opinion guys, they had a lot of license, but the news side was full of real journalists who wanted to do news, and a lot of them were not actually particularly conservative. Again, Ailes was a profoundly flawed, weird dude, but at the same time, he would never have let the opinion side take over the network, which is what happened after he left.
So can we focus in on a particular moment in time, the days after George Floyd was murdered? Donald Trump was describing lawless anarchy and chaos.
Violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa. And they've got clubs and they've got everything. Antifa!
If you were watching Fox News at the time, how much of the coverage was about Antifa?
A great deal.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The nation went up in flames this weekend. The worst people in our society have taken control. Is anyone going to ask what Antifa is? Who leads this group? What is this? Who are these people? Who pays for this?
When you said that Roger Ailes was this flawed leader who kept things stable, and then in his absence there was no leadership and then things just went haywire, I just kept thinking of Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
I mean, if we stipulate that Roger Ailes didn't routinely murder people, you could probably run with the analogy a little bit. There were some people who became guerrillas at Fox and became warlords. I mean, that's sort of what Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity did, is they created their own little fiefdoms.
If you want to see what a deranged, violent, modern-day Brady Bunch might look like, well, look no further than these Antifa freaks.
They're the biggest armed militia in the United States, and we know nothing about them. Why? Because they're aligned with the Democratic Party.
And the fact is, this trickles down to the viewers and it beguiles people, it radicalizes people.
Yes, absolutely.
The truth is, Antifa weren't anywhere near as violent as Fox was making out. It's true that in the days after George Floyd's murder, people identifying as Antifa were arrested for looting and for instigating violence in New Jersey and Austin and Minneapolis and Portland. But according to the FBI, the vast majority of that lawlessness was committed by criminals who weren't motivated by ideology. The right-wing media was presenting a very one-sided view of Antifa. But, then again, so were parts of the left-wing media in their way.
My name is Lee Fong. I'm an investigative reporter.
Until recently, Lee reported on Antifa for The Intercept, an independent left-wing news site. As a teenager, he had been a member of Anti-Racist Action. They hunted out neo-Nazi groups and did battle with them.
As a young man, that was very exciting to join something that was that confrontational, that had direct action against a very clear enemy.
So that's the world that you grew up in, and now cut to 2017 and you're working at The Intercept and you're reporting on a kind of modern day version of that, Antifa. I sounded like Donald Trump when I said.
Yeah. You had increasing violent clashes in the streets. Groups that were either Antifa or other far-left protest groups clashing with alt-right or pro-Trump groups in the streets. I saw many documented cases of protesters attacking journalists. There's this claim that any journalist who attends one of these protests and documents it, does their job as a journalist, is somehow doxing protesters who want to stay anonymous, and therefore there's justification to attack reporters.
This is audio of the photojournalist Maureen Stabe. She's worked for the Washington Post and The Atlantic and Vice. having just been attacked by members of Antifa in 2021. They're dressed entirely in black, with their faces completely covered. She gets too close to them and they knock her to the ground and spray her in the eyes with pepper spray. They throw full soda cans and paint at other journalists too.
I tweeted about cases of really absurd violence, and a number of my colleagues were very upset. It became a big fight internally.
But Lee was never more at odds with his co-workers than during the days after George Floyd's murder.
You couldn't say the hundreds of thousands of people who took to the streets were all Antifa. That's far from the truth. Most of the protests were nonviolent, but there were huge amounts of urban violence, of protesters, of Antifa, of opportunistic looters who just saw, a moment of crisis that could be exploited.
At the time, Fox and the other right-wing media was constantly going on about how terrible Antifa were and blaming Antifa for everything, including the opportunistic looting perpetrated by people who weren't ideological at all. How was The Intercept covering Antifa?
The Intercept covered the protest by saying that this was a revolutionary moment. They had on a professor who said that looting is kind of a fake term, that's simply a redistribution by another means.
The tradition in this country has been to identify looting as criminal behavior.
Lee means Professor Robin D.G. Kelly, who was interviewed by The Intercept in June 2020.
What I try to do in the article is kind of flip the question of what is a looter. And what we've seen often is that the very system of racial capitalism has been the looter.
So in the right-wing media, these looters were being kind of subsumed into Antifa. It's Antifa doing all of this. And the left-wing media, it's the same thing in a way. People were saying, oh, these looters, they aren't looters, they're redistributing wealth.
Yeah, they're all Robin Hood. I mean, there was a lot of spin going on where the actual reality was just muddled. It was all kinds of violence. This was a crisis that everyone attempted to exploit in some way, whether you were a looter or a broadcast journalist. There was not a lot of nuance or care for your community.
If you want evidence of how there's two Americas, each with their own completely distinct media, look at how Antifa was reported on in 2020. During the week the family set off on their twilight camping trip, Americans were getting wildly different impressions of Antifa, depending on which media they consumed. Anyway, back to the family in Forks.
My name is Courtney Thomas, and I live in beautiful Sequim, Washington, on the Olympic Peninsula in northwest Washington state.
The family had passed through Sequim on their way to Forks that day, the two towns being only an hour apart. In fact, you might remember, Sequim was where they had first half noticed that something odd was going on.
As they're driving from Sequim, people start honking at them. Some folks are flipping them off on the road, giving them really hard stares.
It was absolutely no fault of Courtney's, but it turns out that what she did that day inadvertently contributed to the horror that the family suffered.
I am a mother of 3. I have a 7-year-old and twin 5-year-olds. I've been an orthopedic massage therapist for about 14 years, but I've taken a break once COVID hit, and I'm home full-time with my family.
What media do you tend to watch?
I do like MSNBC because I'm a huge Rachel Maddow fan. I just love her. Yeah, it is mostly liberal media. I definitely don't really watch Fox News.
George Floyd's murder 9 days earlier had upset Courtney deeply, and she had felt compelled to do something.
My son is Mexican-American, and I know that he's going to be facing, a lot of things as he grows up. And so I told my husband, I said, I think I'm going to plan a protest. And I was thrilled and shocked the next day to see how many people showed up. I know at some point we had a count of about 600.
So who did turn up for the protest? What was the kind of demographic of people who showed up?
So Sequim is really known as a huge retirement community. So we had a lot of retirees, and then quite a bit younger. A lot of it was moms and children, because that's kind of my crowd. There was strollers and kids everywhere, and we had chalk for them and balloons and bubbles and things like that. It was very, very family-oriented.
Violence! No justice! No peace! No racist police!
And then something unexpected happened.
It did. So I started having friends of mine come up and say, there's this guy from this gun store, and he's posting all these things saying that Antifa is going to show up and they need to come armed. And then I heard someone come up and say, there's a crowd of men behind the block and they have guns. And I thought, why? I saw a circle of men and they were quite armed and they were all kind of, talking to each other, looked like coming up with a plan. And I immediately sent my kids home. My son was there with his signs and he was so proud to be there. But I immediately said, get the kids out of here. I don't know what's going to happen. Families just fled.
So armed in what way? Not that I would know if you said the name of the gun, what the gun looked like, but,
Right.
But how were they armed? And what were they wearing, like Kevlar?
They were. It was kind of crazy. I mean, some of them had like tactical vests. They looked like soldiers. Vests filled with handguns. There was assault rifles, like the big scary guns. It was very intimidating.
At least one of them has a very large, what is described as an attack dog that's barking, foaming at the mouth at women and children. And they very quickly start getting in arguments with the mom.
That's Matthew, the local tribal government man who watched it all unfold. Courtney was baffled. Why would the gun shop owner think that Antifa was planning to join the retirees and the mothers and babies in Squim? But it turns out he did kind of have a reason for believing it.
So on May 31st, a week prior, a Twitter account called Antifa_US issued what's called a call to arms.
Matthew reads me the tweet.
Tonight's the night, comrades. Tonight we say fuck the city, and we move into the residential areas, the white hoods, and we take what's ours. # Black Lives Matter, # fuck America.
The tweet went viral. Antifa were leaving the cities to take over rural America. Donald Trump Jr. retweeted it to over 10 million followers. Except it turned out that the tweet hadn't been written by Antifa at all, as CNN later discovered.
We are now learning that online calls for action, calls for violence attributed to Antifa, are in fact coming from elsewhere, and the president's family buying into this online deceit.
We have learned over the past 24 hours, Twitter telling us that account was not actually run by Antifa at all. It was, in fact, actually run by white nationalists, a known white supremacist group. What it does confirm is suspicions that white nationalists have been jumping on the Antifa movement in ways to try and stoke tension.
It was actually a white supremacist group by the name of Identity Europa. They used it to agitate folks on their side of the political spectrum into this exact panic.
A real false flag operation.
And some Nazi nerd on Twitter managed to execute one that worked across America.
It worked on the Squim gun shop owner. His name was Seth. He had seen the tweet and he saw the flyers for Courtney's protest, and he put two and two together and leapt into action.
He had sent out a post asking all patriots who live in Clallam to private message us for security in our designated areas. You will be called if help is needed. Qualified shooters only. He was recording himself on Facebook Live, walking downtown, telling local businesses, board up your windows. They are bringing buses in. They're going to loot our town. I mean, at one point he said they're going to break our windows and kill our white babies.
Some locals said they also overheard Seth chanting ICE, ICE, ICE being the Immigration Enforcement Agency accused of abusive behaviour towards undocumented immigrants. Courtney turned on her camera and she walked up to Seth. They squared up to each other.
The intel that we had was that Antifa was here, not peaceful protesters.
Where did you get that from?
All over the internet. We were not going to allow that to happen in our town. And when we saw what Antifa posted 2 nights ago about coming to the rural areas and burning down our houses and killing our white babies, we are not for that. That's why you got that response from us.
You should have done a little research before you escalated our event. You terrified people. I sent my son home. When did Antifa show up? Where are they? Antifa, where are you?
I definitely had my sassy pants on. I was pretty frustrated. He kept just saying, Antifa is here.
And he said they're bussing them in.
And I asked him that many times, where are you getting this information? He just kept saying, we have intel that people are showing up in big buses. Another person in town said 3 buses just showed up in Squim. Get ready to protect our town. It was just so strange. There's no buses.
But there was, in fact, a bus. The Big Bertha school bus, trundling obliviously past Squim towards Forks on their twilight camping adventure.
911, where's your emergency?
As this is happening, a guy calls 911 and says he sees a bus at a gas station between Squim and Forks with everybody inside all in black.
They're all dressed in black, anonymous caller.
And then on social media, you start seeing people post about it, specifically in a local group for Forks citizens on Facebook, about Forks could be next. You could not imagine a lower value target for a political act of domestic terrorism than this extremely small, generally poorer forest town in the middle of nowhere. But for whatever reason, the town whips itself into a fury.
And then Big Bertha trundles into town, and it was just this terrible coincidence. Part of them must have been thinking, like, at last Antifa are coming here so we can be on the cliff face of the culture war.
People were thrilled. I spoke to folks who were very open that they had been, quote unquote, waiting for their opportunity to show folks what they're made of, to the point that by the time this completely innocent, sweet family comes into town, dozens of men who are all gun owners are ready for a fight.
Matthew was lurking in their private Facebook group. He saw a photo of the school bus barricaded into the campground by the trees.
And the caption was, "Protect your town, Fork Strong." Unfortunately for them, I immediately went into a screen capturing frenzy, just screen capturing everything.
Matthew screen captured comments like, "Wonder if they feel like they just drove into a horror movie," and "It's like The Purge," and "Let 'em starve." He tweeted the screenshots and they went viral, which led to an unexpectedly happy outcome. More than 200 Clallam County residents paid for an ad in the family's local paper. Quote, "We are saddened and disgusted by the threats and violence that your family encountered while trying to enjoy the beauty of our home. We apologise for the frightening experience you had. We acknowledge that you may never come back here again, and we understand that feeling. However, if you did return one day, we would be honoured to make amends." Did the family ever go back?
No. To my knowledge, they refuse to. They want to forget it ever happened. It was a traumatic experience in their life, and they just want to move on.
And what about Seth, the man who started it all? He apologised too, on his Facebook Live.
So I just wanted to come on, make this short video, just let everybody know. I'm not racist. I didn't say ice, ice, ice. I said heis, heis, heis. And that was a command to my dog Rambo. I totally miffed up. I jumped the gun. I knee-jerked this. There was this Squim organizer girl. She actually owns a business here, and she was pretty pissed at me, and I can understand why. She said I ruined her event. So thank you everybody again for watching. I'm sorry for what went down today.
But the apology wasn't enough to save his business. People started boycotting his gun store.
Eventually he did go out of business, and now he sells tiny homes across the street.
The story may have ended for the family with apologies from ashamed townspeople, but at its heart is something troubling and ongoing. It's the story of a media that cares less than it used to about evidence-based values and has instead become overly influenced on both sides by culture war activists with agendas. This kind of journalism can be powerful and important, but it can also lead to all sorts of trouble. For instance, next time on Things Fell Apart,
Tonight, our Target 8 investigators zero in on the timeline of terror.
Across the state, a state of shock. It's just unimaginable.
It's a shocking story, but the details of that story are even worse than that. They are beyond belief.
Things Fell Apart was written and presented by me, Jon Ronson, and produced by Sarah Shebbear. The music was composed by Phil Channel. The programme was mixed by Giles Aspen. The editor was Philip Sellers, and the commissioning editor was Dan Clark. It's a BBC audio production for BBC Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
"30 years ago, Britain's farms were hit by an epidemic of an infectious brain disorder. They called it mad cow disease. I'm Lucy Proctor, and in The Cows Are Mad from BBC Radio 4, I tell the story of a very weird time in our history.
The media started calling me the mad cow professor.
Mad cow disease rampaged through Britain, first killing cows and then humans. And the thing is, after all this time, nobody knows for sure where mad cow disease originally came from.
The general feeling is that we will never know the answer.
Subscribe to The Cows Are Mad on BBC Sounds.